Karl Popper. Sir Karl Raimund Popper CHFBAFRS was an Austrian-British philosopher and professor. Generally regarded as one of the 20th century's greatest philosophers of science, Popper is known for his rejection of the classical inductivist views on the scientific method in favor of empirical falsification. A theory in the empirical sciences can never be proven, but it can be falsified, meaning that it can and should be scrutinized by decisive experiments. Popper is also known for his opposition to the classical justificationist account of knowledge, which he replaced with critical rationalism, namely the first non-justificational philosophy of criticism in the history of philosophy. In political discourse, he is known for his vigorous defense of liberal democracy and the principles of social criticism that he came to believe made a flourishing open society possible. His political philosophy embraces ideas from all major democratic political ideologies and attempts to reconcile them, namely socialism/social democracy, libertarianism/classical liberalism and conservatism. Karl Popper was born in Vienna in 1902 to upper-middle-class parents. All of Popper's grandparents were Jewish, but they were not devout, and as part of the cultural assimilation process the Popper family converted to Lutheranism before he was born, and so he received a Lutheran baptism. His father Simon Siegmund Karl Popper was a lawyer from Bohemia and a doctor of law at the Vienna University, while his mother Jenny Schiff was of Silesian and Hungarian descent. Popper's uncle was the Austrian philosopher Joseph Popper-Lindquist. After establishing themselves in Vienna, the Poppers made a rapid social climb in Viennese society as Popper's father became a partner in the law firm of Vienna's liberal mayor Raimund Grubluh, and after Grubluh's death in 1898 took over the business. Popper received his middle name after Raimund Grubluh. His father was a bibliophile who had 12,00014,000 volumes in his personal library and took an interest in philosophy, the classics, and social and political issues. Popper inherited both the library and the disposition from him. Later, he would describe the atmosphere of his upbringing as having been decidedly bookish. Popper left school at the age of 16 and attended lectures in mathematics, physics, philosophy, psychology, and the history of music as a guest student at the University of Vienna. In 1919, Popper became attracted by Marxism and subsequently joined the Association of Socialist School Students. He also became a member of the Social Democratic Workers' Party of Austria, which was at that time a party that fully adopted the Marxist ideology. After the street battle in the Horl Gas on June 15, 1919, when police shot 8 of his unarmed party comrades, he became disillusioned by what he saw as the pseudo-scientific historical materialism of Marx, abandoned the ideology, and remained a supporter of social liberalism throughout his life. He worked in street construction for a short amount of time, but was unable to cope with the heavy labor. Continuing to attend university as a guest student, he started an apprenticeship as a cabinet maker, which he completed as a journeyman. He was dreaming at that time of starting a daycare facility for children, for which he assumed the ability to make furniture might be useful. After that he did voluntary service in one of psychoanalyst Alfred Adler's clinics for children. In 1922, he did his matura by way of a second-chance education and finally joined the university as an ordinary student. He completed his examination as an elementary teacher in 1924 and started working at an after-school care club for socially endangered children. In 1925, he went to the newly founded Pädagogisches Institut and continued studying philosophy and psychology. Around that time he started courting Josephine Anna Henninger, who later became his wife. In 1928, he earned a doctorate in psychology, under the supervision of Karl Bühler. His dissertation was titled Zur Method und Frage der Denkpsychologie. In 1929, he obtained the authorization to teach mathematics and physics in secondary school, which he started doing. He married his colleague Josephine Anna Henninger in 1930. Fearing the rise of Nazism and the threat of the Anschluss, he started to use the evenings and the nights to write his first book Die beiden Grundprobleme der Erkenntnistheorie. He needed to publish one to get some academic position in a country that was safe for people of Jewish descent. However, he ended up not publishing the 2-volume work, but a condensed version of it with some new material, Logik der Forschung, in 1934. Here, he criticized psychologism, naturalism, inductivism, and logical positivism, and put forth his theory of potential falsifiability as the criterion demarcating science from non-science. In 1935 and 1936, he took unpaid leave to go to the United Kingdom for a study visit. In 1937, Popper finally managed to get a position that allowed him to emigrate to New Zealand, where he became lecturer in philosophy at Canterbury University College of the University of New Zealand in Christchurch. It was here that he wrote his influential work The Open Society and Its Enemies. In Dunedin he met the professor of physiology John Carew Ecclesiastes and formed a lifelong friendship with him. In 1946, after the Second World War, he moved to the United Kingdom to become reader in logic and scientific method at the London School of Economics. 3 years later, in 1949, he was appointed Professor of Logic and Scientific Method at the University of London. Popper was president of the Aristotelian Society from 1958 to 1959. He retired from academic life in 1969, though he remained intellectually active for the rest of his life. In 1985, he returned to Austria so that his wife could have her relatives around her during the last months of her life. She died in November that year. After the Ludwig Boltzmann Gesellschaft failed to establish him as the director of a newly founded branch researching the philosophy of science, he went back again to the United Kingdom in 1986, settling in Kenley, Surrey. Popper died of complications of cancer, pneumonia, and kidney failure in Kenley at the age of 92 on September 17, 1994. He had been working continuously on his philosophy until 2 weeks before, when he suddenly fell terminally ill. After cremation, his ashes were taken to Vienna and buried at Laenzer Cemetery adjacent to the Orff Center, where his wife Josephine Anna Popper had already been buried. Popper's estate is managed by his secretary and personal assistant Melita Mew and her husband Raimund. Popper's manuscripts went to the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, partly during his lifetime and partly as supplementary material after his death. Klagenfurt University has Popper's library, including his precious bibliophilia, as well as hard copies of the original Hoover material and microfilms of the supplementary material. The remaining parts of the estate were mostly transferred to the Karl Popper Charitable Trust. In October 2008, Klagenfurt University acquired the copyrights from the estate. Popper and his wife had chosen not to have children because of the circumstances of war in the early years of their marriage. Popper commented that this was perhaps a cowardly but in a way a right decision. Popper won many awards and honors in his field, including the Lippincott Award of the American Political Science Association, the Sonning Prize, the Otto Hahn Peace Medal of the United Nations Association of Germany in Berlin, and fellowships in the Royal Society, British Academy, London School of Economics, King's College London, Darwin College, Cambridge, Austrian Academy of Sciences and Charles University, Prague. Austria awarded him the Grand Decoration of Honor in Gold for services to the Republic of Austria in 1986, and the Federal Republic of Germany its Grand Cross with Star and Sash of the Order of Merit, and the Peace Class of the Order pour le Mérite. He received the Humanist Laureate Award from the International Academy of Humanism. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 1965, and was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1976. He was invested with the insignia of a Companion of Honor in 1982. Other awards and recognition for Popper included the City of Vienna Prize for the Humanities, Karl Renner Prize, Austrian Decoration for Science and Art, Dr. Leopold Lucas Prize of the University of Tübingen, Ring of Honor of the City of Vienna, and the Premio Internazionale of the Italian Federico Nietzsche Society. In 1989, he was the first awarded the Prize International Catalonia for his work to develop cultural, scientific, and human values all around the world. In 1992, he was awarded the Kyoto Prize in Arts and Philosophy for symbolizing the open spirit of the 20th century and for his enormous influence on the formation of the modern intellectual climate. Popper's rejection of Marxism during his teenage years left a profound mark on his thought. He had at one point joined a socialist association, and for a few months in 1919 considered himself a communist. Although it's known that Popper worked as an office boy at the communist headquarters, whether or not he ever became a member of the Communist Party is unclear. During this time he became familiar with the Marxist view of economics, class conflict, and history. Although he quickly became disillusioned with the views expounded by Marxism, his flirtation with the ideology led him to distance himself from those who believed that spilling blood for the sake of a revolution was necessary. He came to realize that when it came to sacrificing human lives, one was to think and act with extreme prudence. The failure of democratic parties to prevent fascism from taking over Austrian politics in the 1920s and 1930s traumatized Popper. He suffered from the direct consequences of this failure, since events after the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria by the German Reich in 1938, forced him into permanent exile. His most important works in the field of social science, The Poverty of Historicism and The Open Society and Its Enemies, were inspired by his reflection on the events of his time and represented, in a sense, a reaction to the prevalent totalitarian ideologies that then dominated Central European politics. His books defended democratic liberalism as a social and political philosophy. They also represented extensive critiques of the philosophical presuppositions underpinning all forms of totalitarianism. Popper believed that there was a contrast between the theories of Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler, which he considered non-scientific, and the revolution set off by Albert Einstein's theory of relativity in physics in the early 20th century. Popper thought that Einstein's theory, as a theory properly grounded in scientific thought and method, was highly risky, in the sense that it was possible to deduce consequences from it which were, in the light of the then dominant Newtonian physics, highly improbable, and which would, if they turned out to be false, falsify the whole theory. In contrast, he thought that nothing could, even in principle, falsify psychoanalytic theories. He thus came to the conclusion that they had more in common with primitive myths than with genuine science. This led Popper to conclude that what were regarded as the remarkable strengths of psychoanalytical theories were actually their weaknesses. Psychoanalytical theories were crafted in a way that made them able to refute any criticism and to give an explanation for every possible form of human behavior. The nature of such theories made it impossible for any criticism or experiment, even in principle, to show them to be false. When Popper later tackled the problem of demarcation in the philosophy of science, this conclusion led him to posit that the strength of a scientific theory lies in its both being susceptible to falsification, and not actually being falsified by criticism made of it. He considered that if a theory cannot, in principle, be falsified by criticism, it is not a scientific theory. Popper coined the term critical rationalism to describe his philosophy. Concerning the method of science, the term indicates his rejection of classical empiricism, and the classical observationalist inductivist account of science that had grown out of it. Popper argued strongly against the latter, holding that scientific theories are abstract in nature, and can be tested only indirectly, by reference to their implications. He also held that scientific theory, and human knowledge generally, is irreducibly conjectural or hypothetical, and is generated by the creative imagination to solve problems that have arisen in specific historico-cultural settings. Logically, no number of positive outcomes at the level of experimental testing can confirm a scientific theory, but a single counterexample is logically decisive. It shows the theory, from which the implication is derived, to be false. To say that a given statement, call it T, is falsifiable does not mean that T is false. Rather, it means that, if T is false, then, T could be shown to be false, by observation or by experiment. Popper's account of the logical asymmetry between verification and falsifiability lies at the heart of his philosophy of science. It also inspired him to take falsifiability as his criterion of demarcation between what is, and is not, genuinely scientific. A theory should be considered scientific if, and only if, it is falsifiable. This led him to attack the claims of both psychoanalysis and contemporary Marxism to scientific status, on the basis that their theories are not falsifiable. Popper also wrote extensively against the famous Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. He strongly disagreed with Niels Bohr's instrumentalism and supported Albert Einstein's realist approach to scientific theories about the universe. Popper's falsifiability resembles Charles Peirce's 19th-century fallibilism. In Of Clocks and Clouds, Popper remarked that he wished he had known of Peirce's work earlier. In All Life is Problem-Solving, Popper sought to explain the apparent progress of scientific knowledge, that is, how it is that our understanding of the universe seems to improve over time. This problem arises from his position that the truth content of our theories, even the best of them, cannot be verified by scientific testing, but can only be falsified. Again, in this context the word falsified does not refer to something being fake, rather, that something can be shown to be false by observation or experiment. Some things simply do not lend themselves to being shown to be false, and therefore, are not falsifiable. If so, then how is it that the growth of science appears to result in a growth in knowledge? In Popper's view, the advance of scientific knowledge is an evolutionary process characterized by his formula P S 1 T T 1 E E 1 P S 2 display style mathrm PS underscore 1 right arrow mathrm TT underscore 1 right arrow mathrm EE underscore 1 right arrow mathrm PS underscore 2 comma. In response to a given problem situation, P S 1 display style mathrm PS underscore 1. A number of competing conjectures, or tentative theories, T display style mathrm TT, are systematically subjected to the most rigorous attempts at falsification possible. This process, error elimination, E display style mathrm EE, performs a similar function for science that natural selection performs for biological evolution. Theories that better survive the process of refutation are not more true, but rather, more fit, in other words, more applicable to the problem situation at hand. P S 1 display style mathrm PS underscore 1. Consequently, just as a species' biological fitness does not ensure continued survival, neither does rigorous testing protect a scientific theory from refutation in the future. Yet, as it appears that the engine of biological evolution has, over many generations, produced adaptive traits equipped to deal with more and more complex problems of survival, likewise, the evolution of theories through the scientific method may, in Popper's view, reflect a certain type of progress toward more and more interesting problems. P S 2 display style mathrm PS underscore 2. For Popper, it is in the interplay between the tentative theories and error elimination that scientific knowledge advances toward greater and greater problems, in a process very much akin to the interplay between genetic variation and natural selection. Among his contributions to philosophy is his claim to have solved the philosophical problem of induction. He states that while there is no way to prove that the sun will rise, it is possible to formulate the theory that every day the sun will rise. If it does not rise on some particular day, the theory will be falsified and will have to be replaced by a different one. Until that day, there is no need to reject the assumption that the theory is true. Nor is it rational, according to Popper, to make instead the more complex assumption that the sun will rise until a given day, but will stop doing so the day after, or similar statements with additional conditions. Such a theory would be true with higher probability, because it cannot be attacked so easily. To falsify the first one, it is sufficient to find that the sun has stopped rising. To falsify the second one additionally needs the assumption that the given day has not yet been reached. Popper held that it is the least likely, or most easily falsifiable, or simplest theory that explains known facts that one should rationally prefer. His opposition to positivism, which held that it is the theory most likely to be true that one should prefer, here becomes very apparent. It is impossible, Popper argues, to ensure a theory to be true. It is more important that its falsity can be detected as easily as possible. Popper and David Hume agreed that there is often a psychological belief that the sun will rise tomorrow, but both denied that there is logical justification for the supposition that it will, simply because it always has in the past. Popper writes, "I approached the problem of induction through Hume. Hume, I felt, was perfectly right in pointing out that induction cannot be logically justified." Popper held that rationality is not restricted to the realm of empirical or scientific theories, but that it is merely a special case of the general method of criticism, the method of finding and eliminating contradictions in knowledge without ad hoc measures. According to this view, rational discussion about metaphysical ideas, about moral values and even about purposes is possible. Popper's student W. W. Bartley III tried to radicalize this idea and made the controversial claim that not only can criticism go beyond empirical knowledge, but that everything can be rationally criticized. To Popper, who was an anti-justificationist, traditional philosophy is misled by the false principle of sufficient reason. He thinks that no assumption can ever be or needs ever to be justified, so a lack of justification is not a justification for doubt. Instead, theories should be tested and scrutinized. It is not the goal to bless theories with claims of certainty or justification, but to eliminate errors in them. He writes, "There are no such things as good positive reasons, nor do we need such things, but obviously cannot quite bring to believe that this is my opinion, let alone that it is right." Popper's principle of falsifiability runs into prima facie difficulties when the epistemological status of mathematics is considered. It is difficult to conceive how simple statements of arithmetic, such as 2 + 2 = 4, could ever be shown to be false. If they are not open to falsification, they cannot be scientific. If they are not scientific, it needs to be explained how they can be informative about real-world objects and events. Popper's solution was an original contribution in the philosophy of mathematics. His idea was that a number statement such as 2 apples + 2 apples = 4 apples can be taken in two senses. In one sense it is irrefutable and logically true, in the second sense it is factually true and falsifiable. Concisely, the pure mathematics 2 + 2 = 4 is always true, but, when the formula is applied to real-world apples, it is open to falsification. In The Open Society and Its Enemies and the Poverty of Historicism, Popper developed a critique of historicism and a defense of the open society. Popper considered historicism to be the theory that history develops inexorably and necessarily according to knowable general laws towards a determinate end. He argued that this view is the principal theoretical presupposition underpinning most forms of authoritarianism and totalitarianism. He argued that historicism is founded upon mistaken assumptions regarding the nature of scientific law and prediction. Since the growth of human knowledge is a causal factor in the evolution of human history, and since no society can predict, scientifically, its own future states of knowledge, it follows, he argued, that there can be no predictive science of human history. For Popper, metaphysical and historical indeterminism go hand in hand. In his early years, Popper was impressed by Marxism, whether of communists or socialists. An event that happened in 1919 had a profound effect on him. During a riot, caused by the communists, the police shot several unarmed people, including some of Popper's friends, when they tried to free party comrades from prison. The riot had, in fact, been part of a plan by which leaders of the Communist Party with connections to Bellacun tried to take power by a coup. Popper did not know about this at that time. However, he knew that the riot instigators were swayed by the Marxist doctrine that class struggle would produce vastly more dead men than the inevitable revolution brought about as quickly as possible, and so had no scruples to put the life of the rioters at risk to achieve their selfish goal of becoming the future leaders of the working class. This was the start of his later criticism of historicism. Popper began to reject Marxist historicism, which he associated with questionable means, and later socialism, which he associated with placing equality before freedom. In 1947, Popper co-founded the Mont Pelerin Society, with Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, Ludwig von Mises and others, although he did not fully agree with the think tank's charter and ideology. Specifically, he unsuccessfully recommended that socialists should be invited to participate, and that emphasis should be put on a hierarchy of humanitarian values rather than advocacy of a free market as envisioned by classical liberalism. Although Popper was an advocate of toleration, he also warned against unlimited tolerance. In The Open Society and Its Enemies, he argued, unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed, and tolerance with them. In this formulation, I do not imply, for instance, that we should always suppress the utterance of intolerant philosophies, as long as we can counter them by rational argument and keep them in check by public opinion. Suppression would certainly be most unwise. But we should claim the right to suppress them if necessary, even by force, for it may easily turn out that they are not prepared to meet us on the level of rational argument, but begin by denouncing all argument. They may forbid their followers to listen to rational argument, because it is deceptive, and teach them to answer arguments by the use of their fists or pistols. We should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant. We should claim that any movement preaching intolerance places itself outside the law, and we should consider incitement to intolerance and persecution as criminal, in the same way as we should consider incitement to murder, or to kidnapping, or to the revival of the slave trade, as criminal. As early as 1934, Popper wrote of the search for truth as one of the strongest motives for scientific discovery. Still, he describes in Objective Knowledge early concerns about the much criticized notion of truth as correspondence. Then came the semantic theory of truth formulated by the logician Alfred Tarski and published in 1933. Popper wrote of learning in 1935 of the consequences of Tarski's theory, to his intense joy. The theory met critical objections to truth as correspondence and thereby rehabilitated it. The theory also seemed, in Popper's eyes, to support metaphysical realism and the regulative idea of a search for truth. According to this theory, the conditions for the truth of a sentence as well as the sentences themselves are part of a metalanguage. So, for example, the sentence "snow is white" is true if and only if snow is white. Although many philosophers have interpreted, and continue to interpret, Tarski's theory as a deflationary theory, Popper refers to it as a theory in which "is true" is replaced with "corresponds to the facts." He bases this interpretation on the fact that examples such as the one described above refer to two things, assertions and the facts to which they refer. He identifies Tarski's formulation of the truth conditions of sentences as the introduction of a metalinguistic predicate and distinguishes the following cases. The first case belongs to the metalanguage, whereas the second is more likely to belong to the object language. Hence, "it is true" that possesses the logical status of a redundancy. "Is true," on the other hand, is a predicate necessary for making general observations such as "John was telling the truth about Philip." Upon this basis, along with that of the logical content of assertions, Popper went on to develop his important notion of verisimilitude or truth-likeness. The intuitive idea behind verisimilitude is that the assertions or hypotheses of scientific theories can be objectively measured with respect to the amount of truth and falsity that they imply. And, in this way, one theory can be evaluated as more or less true than another on a quantitative basis which, Popper emphasizes forcefully, has nothing to do with subjective probabilities or other merely epistemic considerations. The simplest mathematical formulation that Popper gives of this concept can be found in the 10th chapter of Conjectures and Refutations. Here he defines it as where v s a \display style \math at vs is the verisimilitude of a c t v a \display style \math at ct underscore v is a measure of the content of the truth of a, and c t f a \display style \math at ct underscore f is a measure of the content of the falsity of a. Popper's original attempt to define not just verisimilitude, but an actual measure of it, turned out to be inadequate. However, it inspired a wealth of new attempts. Knowledge, for Popper, was objective, both in the sense that it is objectively true, and also in the sense that knowledge has an ontological status independent of the knowing subject. He proposed three worlds: World 1, being the physical world, or physical states; World 2, being the world of mind, or mental states, ideas, and perceptions; and World 3, being the body of human knowledge expressed in its manifold forms, or the products of the second world made manifest in the materials of the first world. World 3, he argued, was the product of individual human beings in exactly the same sense that an animal path is the product of individual animals, and that, as such, has an existence and evolution independent of any individual knowing subjects. The influence of World 3, in his view, on the individual human mind is at least as strong as the influence of World 1. In other words, the knowledge held by a given individual mind owes at least as much to the total accumulated wealth of human knowledge, made manifest, as to the world of direct experience. As such, the growth of human knowledge could be said to be a function of the independent evolution of World 3. Many contemporary philosophers, such as Daniel Dennett, have not embraced Popper's three-world conjecture, due mostly, it seems, to its resemblance to mind-body dualism. The creation-evolution controversy in the United States raises the issue of whether creationistic ideas may be legitimately called science and whether evolution itself may be legitimately called science. In the debate, both sides, and even courts in their decisions, have frequently invoked Popper's criterion of falsifiability. In this context, passages written by Popper are frequently quoted in which he speaks about such issues himself. For example, he famously stated Darwinism is not a testable scientific theory, but a metaphysical research program, a possible framework for testable scientific theories. He continued, "And yet, the theory is invaluable. I do not see how, without it, our knowledge could have grown as it has done since Darwin. In trying to explain experiments with bacteria which become adapted to, say, penicillin, it is quite clear that we are greatly helped by the theory of natural selection. Although it is metaphysical, it sheds much light upon very concrete and very practical researches. It allows us to study adaptation to a new environment in a rational way. It suggests the